I'm going to get started so we don't go too far over time. So the talk today, the importance of telling and sharing your story, digital storytelling to foster healing and resilience. I talk a lot about images to support words. Before we dive in, I wanted to share this image my younger son Maverick captured on our first federally recognized National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. I acknowledge that I live, work, and play on the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. I'm grateful to all those who told stories before me and the storytellers yet to come. I do want to mention there's a little handout that's connected to the app that's here, and some of their clickable links. So if this is something that you want to kind of come back to, feel free. I love it. This quote feels particularly poignant after learning about the work being done through this network over the last few days and with Dr. Rosenbaum's talk this morning. By the way, he would make a great digital story, so we'll talk about that later. So we are the map makers and the travelers, a Brené Brown quote. I want you to start by doing a quick introduction of yourself to someone near you, just one sentence. Because when I think about my role as a parent, and when we walk into a healthcare provider's office and they don't tell us who they are, or if we're in hospital and we've seen 6 people already and I haven't heard who they are, this is just one of those little practices that I like to get people thinking about. So I'll do mine first so you know what to expect. My name is Kristy Wolfe. I'm a parent of a 10-year-old boy with congenital heart disease. And because of this lived experience, I have worked to humanize healthcare experiences through storytelling. Now it's your turn. You can make it about whatever you want. You can make it interesting, but you only have 30 seconds, and I'm gonna say switch, and then you have to switch right away because we're on a super tight timeline. So, go. Switch if you haven't done it already. All right, I'm gonna bring you back together. That was it, 30 seconds. It's not a lot of time, but it's enough time to tell people a little bit of information about you. We all have stories about what brought us here. And we heard earlier today about that whole idea of silos versus commonalities. A lot of what we talk about in digital storytelling are the things that, although we have different experience, it's what brings us together. So at a recent healthcare conference, a physician who was presenting said, "I choose to be here and families don't." That really resonated with me. Families don't choose to be here. They don't choose NDD, and they choose you and the work you are doing. So thank you for the work you're doing for kids and their families. I have to say I'm really grateful that KBHN makes a point of honoring the experience and time of patients and families who choose to share their experiences. Thank you for inviting me to talk about ethical storytelling and for live streaming so people who had barriers to accessing this conference can still learn with us. I personally have shared our family's medical story many times, but there's a lot of emotional labor that goes into sharing a family story like this. I share it because it does feel like the weight of it becomes a little less every time we talk about it, and it also opens up an opportunity for people to ask questions, connect, and just find out a little bit more. It might even lead to them sharing their own story. I think it's unlikely that we'll have a Q&A at the end, but if we do, feel free to ask me any questions about digital storytelling or my family's experience. And if it's not today, grab me during this conference. That's absolutely fine. So there's no better way to kick off a digital storytelling session than by showing you a digital story. A digital story is a 2 to 4 minute movie created with images and video clips, voiceover narration, music, and various video editing techniques. It's about a meaningful moment in a person's life. The one you're gonna see is one of my own personal stories, and it's about our family's bedtime routine. The story was created for a mental health project in partnership with Imagine Citizens Network and Mike Lang Stories. As you watch, I want you to think about what stands out for you in the story. We are going to turn and talk about what resonated for people after, so just fair warning, there's going to be more talking involved. What was your favorite part of the day?
Coming with you.
I like that. Who were you kind to, and who was kind to you? What are you grateful for? What are you looking forward to? Okay, Kim. What are you grateful for?
My family, my friends, my food, my toys.
This is our bedtime routine every night. Okay, most nights. I lay in bed with each of my boys and ask these questions. We talk about their day, both the good and the bad. We end on a high note, something they're looking forward to, because it's so easy to focus on what went wrong. Too easy. We're working on that. But sometimes I have trouble focusing on the positive. It's a skill I have to practice too. We finish with a song. One of my boys prefers
Sun, Mr. Golden Sun.
Whereas my older son always requests Baby Beluga in a deep blue sea. We've sung that song since he was a baby, even way back in the neonatal intensive care unit. Sometimes as we're talking, I lay my head on each of their chests and listen as their hearts pump. One heartbeat is the textbook love-dub sound, the kind of beat that tells you his heart is working well. His valves are opening and closing with each beat of his heart. The other heartbeat sounds different. The whoosh sound is also considered textbook, but for a very different reason. He has congenital heart disease. Congenital heart disease is just one part of our story. Right now, things are good. At our most recent hospital visit, our son's cardiologist moved his appointments from every 6 months to just once a year. This felt like a win. It was what I thought about that night when I asked the boys about what they were grateful for. When we got to the question, did you have a bug today? I couldn't help but think about the pacemaker clinic appointments, the biannual x-rays for scoliosis clinic, and the heart surgeries we know are still in his future. This is not the end of our heart story. Congenital heart disease has impacted every part of our son's life. It has affected his younger brother and his grandparents. It has changed the way our family talks about mental health. Our family always comes back to, what was the best part of your day? Who were you kind to, and who was kind to you? What are you grateful for? What are you looking forward to? Sometimes it's all about the words you use, the questions you ask, the things you choose to focus on, the coping skills you model and you teach. Oh, thank you. Okay, I'll take that. So we're going to talk about what resonated with you. It might have been the story itself. It might have been a particular image. It might have been a detail. It might have been the pace and the movement of the way things were moving or the music. So I want you to take a few minutes with the people at your table and actually have a conversation about that. That's one of the powers of digital storytelling, actually taking the time and talking about the story afterwards. So I'm serious, I'm not going to talk. It might be like 3 minutes. We'll see how it goes, but start talking right away. What resonated with you? All right, I'm going to ask you to start wrapping up your conversations. I do appreciate the music that was put on in the background. That was a nice touch. I didn't ask for that. That's this team. They're on it. Friends, there is a chat for this event in the app. So if you wanted to say something, we don't have a lot of time to go through I would love to hear what resonated for people, especially from like the research side of things and some of the programs we've been hearing about. So if you wanted to put it in the chat, that would be really appreciated. But is there anybody that did want to stand up and just tell us something that resonated for you? Anybody feeling brave right now? Also, can you tell I was a teacher? There's a hand in the back.
Hi, thank you so much, professional parent. Honestly, it was positive, and it was engaging, and it didn't, while I have lived experience and professional experience as a mom, I didn't feel sad.
Yeah.
Or reminded me of the things that I live through on a daily basis. It made me feel really good. I don't know how else to express that, but it made me feel really good. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. And one of the things that we do when I'll explain more about the process of storytelling as we keep going, but focusing on a meaningful moment, and I do find that often those meaningful moments that people choose to focus on are something that's negative, like that you could take as negative. But I also find that usually when somebody wants to share their story, they want to give people hope about what could happen. And so choices like the music, the images, so it might be a hard story, and then there's still ways to tie in that hopeful feeling. Now, I will be honest, that is one example, and there are some stories that I have that are not going to leave you feeling super hopeful, but it's also a piece of what the storyteller wants to portray in that. But I agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristy. That was really powerful, and I think just seeing the images with your children and you and your love, obviously, for your children and your nightly routine with them just show what you value and the value of you and your family. So I think we were talking at our table, you could have said that, but seeing the visual images and the music, but your children in particular and you with them, was really powerful. Thank you for your digital story, for sharing that.
Absolutely. Thank you. And it's a really good point. You learned a lot about me in 3 minutes, a lot more than I could tell you, and seeing the images, you see things that you're not going to hear from me. So you got a lot more out of that story, and I think that's really the power in digital storytelling, that you can bring other people's experiences. The stories that I share or that are public I have actually a list of digital stories that would be of interest to this group of people. So at the end, there's a QR code. It takes you to my link tree, and right there's a YouTube video list of different stories that are all public. Those storytellers have given permission for me to share that in this kind of a context. So just thinking about some of those things that you can kind of watch some different examples, because that's just one example of a story. I'm gonna move on, I think. I didn't really see any other hands up, but please do come tell me if there's something that you would like to talk about afterwards. So, digital storytelling and digital stories are built around moments. My moment was literally a bedtime routine, but you learned all about our cardiology experience at the same time. There's 2 parts to digital storytelling. There's the process and there's the product. The product is what you saw. It can be shared for advocacy, it could be shared for education, it could be shared within the context of research. But other people make stories that they don't share. For example, Sue Robbins, who's taking a picture of me right now, and I'm calling her out on it, recently made a story that was just for her family. And she wrote a blog about the experience and what that was like. It doesn't need to be something public. And so when you think about research, it might not be something that's shared heavily, because that will stop some people from doing it, right? But I think that there's a lot of different ways to go about this. And then the process side of things, it involves 4 steps. Finding the story, which is like thinking about that meaningful moment that you want to focus your story around. Telling the story. That's a 200 to 400 word draft. It's a long Facebook post. It's not hours of writing. It is a pretty short piece of writing to get a 2 to 4 minute movie. The next part is the storyteller voicing it. So that's their voice telling the story, and then starting to choose images and crafting that story. So whether they're personal photos, whether they're stock photography, whether there's video clips, that all is a piece that the storyteller helps to decide and brings all the pictures. I can do videos that have no personal photography that would show you who the family is, or some people choose to make every single picture something about their family. And again, that's all kind of dependent on the storyteller. We also start doing the transitions, all of those little editing techniques, and add music to put behind it. And that is a big part of what gives you those feelings as you're watching those movies. The final stage is sharing. And as I mentioned, it can be something public, it could be used for advocacy. I have quite a few people that end up using their story when they come up here and they kind of introduce themselves through a story, and then they go on to give their talk. And then I have people who have never shared it and don't plan to. But it's kind of up to the storyteller. That's the most important concept of this digital storytelling process with common language, that the story belongs to the storyteller. It's all about their storyteller well-being. They also have last word on how it's used. So if you decide to do something like digital storytelling and they create a story and decide, you know what, I'm not comfortable sharing that, it's their story. And I always put that forward to an organization first, because you might not end up with what you expect you're going to end up with. And then the last thing on this slide is just that my role as a facilitator is to help a storyteller tell a meaningful moment from their life, and it looks different every single time we do it. So I wanted to introduce you to Mike Lang. This is actually from a podcast that I host called Leading Through Stories, and in episode 1 of this season, it was with Mike Lang, and he's the founder of Common Language Digital Storytelling, which is a facilitator training and certification organization based in Calgary. But in this conversation that we had, we were really focusing on storyteller well-being for this particular episode, and really thinking about that question: is this going to enhance the storyteller's well-being or detract from it? I also wanted to mention, Mike actually has done a big project with KBHN that I didn't know about until I told him I was coming here. And so he actually did a number of stories with partner organizations that helped with navigation supports for families. And then another part of the project was a suite of digital stories that were embedded in the training curriculum on NDD for 211 operators in Alberta. So just talking about KBHN, I learned a whole bunch of other things that I didn't realize had been going on behind the scenes. So the point of this talk is that stories matter. Stories can support data, and they can communicate understanding. I think you probably see where I'm going with this. These are just 2 examples of the research papers that you can find on Mike's website. One of them is a methodology of digital storytelling in healthcare settings. The other one is a framework to guide storytelling as a knowledge translation intervention for health-promoting behavior change. Mike did his PhD at the University of Calgary. He finished in 2022, and the serialization of his PhD can be found on his website as well. When I mention the end, there's the QR code. The link to his work is there as well. So I'm an FER program grad, and I work closely with Mike and with organizations and individuals to tell stories. There are different ways to tell stories, and actually, before I get into that, Common Language is a group of facilitators. There's 25 of us. Christina is actually one of them, and you would have heard from her yesterday if you were at the training days. She was talking about something totally unrelated from this. But yeah, there's about 25 of us across Canada into some of the other countries, and some of us are connected to specific organizations like Cancer Care. Other people, I'm a consultant, so I will work with organizations. Generally, it tends to be nonprofits, and some people are in research. So Mike does a lot with research, and Christina does a lot with research. And we will happily help you if you are thinking storytelling might be something that you would like to do. But there are 3 different ways of doing this. The individual approach is one-on-one co-creation. So this is something where I would sit down with a storyteller, and often, honestly, it's mostly done over Zoom because I can do it from far. We work together 4 times over Zoom to do this, and it's about 20 hours of a storyteller's time. So when we're working on co-creation, I think of it as myself as the editor and they're the director. So I'm teaching them what we need to do, but I'm doing the technological side of things. I have a story on the playlist that I was mentioning. It's called Anton's Story. He is a former child. I loved when Dr. Rosenbaum said that the other day. He was a former child. He's a 26-year-old with autism and he's nonverbal. And he told a story about his synesthesia and creating a piece of art for our local arts places, like a community organization for art. And so he communicates by pointing letter by letter on a sheet of paper, and he communicated the whole story. He made all the decisions about the imagery and the music with the support of an aide. So it's really amazing to see what you can do, and he would never be able to get up here and talk to you about his own experience, but you get a lot out of that story. I also have an example on the YouTube list that's a social worker in Alberta who is also a medical parent. And when she was doing her Master of Social Work, she was told not to think like a parent. That's literally the moment she chose to focus her digital story on. I am going to think like a parent, and why she brings her lived experience into the work that she does. So that's level 1, that idea of working one-on-one with someone to tell a digital story. Level 2, so any of our facilitators that are trained as level 2 can do group workshops. So they've been trained to work with a group of people. We usually say between 6 and 8 people, where each person is creating their own digital story. So when I did my level 2 training, Christina was one of the people that was my volunteer. We brought a group of medical parents together. Each of them learned how to do their own digital story. So I'm talking about it, I'm teaching them, but they are actually the ones creating it themselves. Christina's story is on that digital story playlist, and her and I recently worked with an organization called Western Canadian Children's Heart Network, and we did stories for adults with congenital heart disease. So we brought a group of 6 adults together for a weekend retreat, and they have just last week finished screening their stories, and it was incredible. They were so excited about the work they did. Every one of those storytellers ended up deciding to share it with Heartbeats, which is the organization that was working with them, and then also with the funder, which is WCCHN, so they can use it to share in newsletters, to put on their website, to have lunch and learns. Like this, there's a lot of opportunity for how a story can be used moving forward, as well as all of those storytellers were interested in presenting their stories. So that's level 2. Level 3 makes sense in this kind of context as well. If digital storytelling or using stories with people that you're working with makes sense, it might actually make more sense for you not to hire a facilitator to come in and run a workshop. It might make sense to get trained. So level 3 is basically that train the trainer idea, so that you have the skills to do the storytelling with the people that you're working with. We have one coming up. I'm teaching it. It starts on Wednesday, and I have 3 physicians in there, which we've never had before. That's going to be super interesting. Before I go on, that's all I'm going to talk about the process. This is super quick and dirty on this. So I just wanted to know if there's any burning questions that people had about the process. You can always put them in the chat. You can find me after. Is there anything that people feel like they need right this second? No, I explained it that well. Phenomenal. Okay. So, what story will you tell? Over the last few days, I've heard so many opportunities for digital stories. During the training days, Sarah Raza talked about her trajectory into public policy. That was a digital story right there. Kelsey talked about her work with fathers raising children with cerebral palsy. I could picture that as one-on-one digital stories with those fathers, or bringing that into a group workshop. I was so excited hearing from the Sibling Youth Advisory Council, SIBYAC, getting youth involved in that, doing it online. It's something that could easily happen, and I'm going to be honest, I've worked with some people that are quite a bit older, and sometimes that can be really challenging, trying to create their own story, and youth engagement with digital storytelling is like exactly the platform that works for this. I also was thinking like the origin story of the FER program, or Dr. Reynolds talked about the origin story of KBHN. All of those could be digital stories. You just need one person that has a story that they want to focus on, something meaningful that's come from it that can then be used for other things. There was a bunch more things today, but I want to take the time to think about your stories. I as F Words was presenting, I was like, and this, and then we could do this, and I'm gonna sit down and tell them everything that I was like, I have a group of students in the Bow Valley where I'm from that I will be working with, and we need a topic. And so I was like, great, I'm gonna have 4 classes. Why wouldn't I just pick those words, teach them this, and then we get into getting them to create stories around it, just as like an example of how that could be done. So turn back to the people that are with you and start to just, is there something that you're thinking about that would make sense? So I'm gonna give you a couple minutes here, and then I'm gonna finish out the presentation. Go. Okay. Just being conscious of time, and I don't want to keep you too long. And I know once you get started about digital storytelling, there's like ideas that just end up flowing. So, do you see digital stories as part of your work? Is it one-on-one creation, or is it workshop? Will you need a facilitator to support, or will you get someone on your team properly trained? There's so many things to think about. When I think about personal stories, sometimes it's an image that comes to mind that I build it around. Sometimes it's a moment, sometimes it's a person. As I mentioned before, it's often something that doesn't feel so great, something negative that maybe has turned around. And I really find that when I work with storytellers, we'll often talk about a positive and a negative moment and see how the story comes from there. So, at the end of each session, I wrap up with a check-in. This is an example of a check-in tool that was given to us at the hospital after Kane's most recent heart surgery. And it says 5, I'm feeling great. 4, I'm feeling fine. 3, I'm feeling a little unsure. 2, I'm beginning to lose it. 1, I lost it, I need a break. I love this, I use this all the time. So you're gonna hold up on your hand how you're feeling right now, because this is my chance to check in and make sure everybody's good. We've had like a pretty simple story that I shared. It wasn't too intense, but I'm gonna make you do it anyways. Show me on your fingers. Okay. We often will share mental health numbers. We will talk about resources for people after they leave any given session. If we're working together 4 times, I will talk about this at the end of each session, because it's really important to check in, because creating stories, but listening to stories as well, can be really emotional work. So I'm leaving you with, here's the QR code I mentioned. Also, oh, what, the E's not on the right line? Oh my God. That's the thing that'll drive me crazy. Instagram is my preferred, but I'm on all those ridiculous social media channels because digital stories are super visual and you gotta get them out after when people want to share them. But I wanna leave you with, we all have stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And honestly, those stories matter. So connect with me. I'm always happy to talk about digital storytelling, photography, our medical experience. If this piqued your interest, commit to something. Use the QR code or the link in the app that's on the event app. I keep saying the wrong thing for that. But commit to something. Watch the KBHN Stories of Interest on YouTube. Listen to the Leading Through Stories podcast. Look into the research that Mike Lang has been doing, or connect with me. But please, most important of all, make sure to take care of yourself, your well-being is what keeps you working with these families and for these kids. So thank you.